Dave.
Hello.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Good, good. Is this video or audio?
This is both, if that suits you.
It's totally fine. I just am I okay? I could go up to my desk and
You're perfect, man. You don't have to worry about a thing.
oh great.
Well, thank you for agreeing to do this. When I first off, I should start off by saying what a fan I am of your writing, of your
Thank you.
podcast. You occupy such a singular space of somebody who really delves into all of the underlying issues within sports, capitalism, race, all of the issues that really kind of are present in America, and so present in sports, but too often are not talked about the ways that you do it. So thank you for all the work that you do
Well,
in that regard.
well, thank you. You do the same in a very difficult landscape. So it's an honor to be on your show.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. I specifically reached out to you, Dave, because I read your piece about Hank Aaron, who passed this week, and just like such a titan of American sports. And you so beautifully wrote about him and his legacy. Can you talk a little bit about Hank Aaron and his passing and what his legacy represents?
Well, sure. Just from a baseball perspective, Henry Hammer and Hank Aaron is absolutely, a person without peer. I mean, we're talking about somebody who made 25 all-star teams. I mean, just think about that. This week everybody is drooling about Tom Brady. Tom Brady's made 14 Pro Bowls in his 20 plus year career. Henry Aaron, 25 all-star teams. He had so many hits that if you took away every home run Henry Aaron hit, and he hit 755 of them, he would still have 3,000 hits for his career and still be in the Hall of Fame if you literally just took away his home runs. I mean, it's just an unbelievable set of statistical accomplishments. Now, what makes Henry Aaron such an American icon beyond the world of sports is that he was able to set these records in the context of just some of the most abject racism that any athlete post World War II has faced in this country. And I am including, people like Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, Tommy Smith, John Carlos. Because when you talk about Henry Aaron, you're talking about somebody who, when he was chasing down Babe Ruth's record of 714 home runs, he received more mail than anybody in the United States not named Richard Nixon. I mean, just a staggering amount of mail. And some of that mail was supportive, like, go for it, Henry, you're doing great. But a lot of that was death threats of the ugliest possible racist variety. And those were the letters that Henry Aaron kept to remind him of what he went through and to remind the world of what he went through. And the part
Yeah.
about Henry Aaron that just is unbelievable to me is, he almost hit that 715th home run in 1973, but he came up just short. And he did it in April of 74. So he had to spend that entire offseason thinking that he might be killed, thinking that someone in his family might be killed. And it was so realistic to the world that Henry Aaron might not live to hit that home run that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution actually wrote an obituary just in case he was assassinated, so they would have it on file. So that's who Henry Aaron is. That's who he was. And that's why we remember him today.
And David, it's so fascinating how a lot of times sports fans are so eager to just look at numbers, especially in this stats heavy kind of era that we're in now. It's like, let's just look at the numbers. And as you say, Hank Aaron, stands up against anyone with statistics, just in a vacuum, the numbers, right? But as you say, to achieve the numbers that he achieved, and he's in the top 10, top five, even in so many categories, RBIs, home runs, hits. I think had this staggering number of seasons where he had more walks than strikeouts.
Yeah, for his
All of
career, he had more walks than strikeouts.
So all of these insane statistical achievements, but you can't look at them in a vacuum. This was his career started in, I think, 54. So like it spanned like the really kind of a lot of the darkest days of the civil rights era. And he achieved these things parallel to the civil rights movement. And as you say, um, Jackie Robinson came in 47. He came, I think, 7 years later. But he was not, he was sleeping sometimes in the clubhouse, I read, and some of the things that you referred to that he was receiving from fans, hate mail and stuff, he was receiving those from opponents and teammates at times too. So you
Yeah,
really can't divorce the achievements of this guy from the things that he had to endure, as you say.
exactly. And playing a lot of that career in Atlanta, so in the South, and at a time when Atlanta was a small market, and at a time when Atlanta was a white city. And so he's doing this in a very difficult context. He's not playing in San Francisco like Willie Mays, or in a place that would be more cosmopolitan and less racially entrenched with Jim Crow. And he not only played with alarming consistency, but he also was somebody who stood up and against Jim Crow and was heard on those issues at a time when it was very dangerous to be so. So it really, like, the degree of difficulty with which he had this tremendous career is just something that can't be discounted at all. When we assess the accomplishments that he did. I mean, when he started playing Major League Baseball, it was not every team had black players at all. The league wasn't fully integrated until 1959. And every team truly had quotas. Like, you can only have so many black players on the team. And by the early 70s, when he retired, the Pittsburgh Pirates fielded an all-black starting lineup, including the pitcher.
Mm.
So think about that amount of change between when he started, and it's segregated, and he's having to stay in his own lodgings when the team travels in the South and eat by himself, to go from that to the Pittsburgh Pirates having an all-black starting nine. I mean, that's monumental change. And when you think about the level of just concentration that it takes to play Major League Baseball, and his ability to do that day in, day out, literally the most consistent player to ever take the field. Because he never had like some major showy season. He never hit 50 home runs in a year. So just this consistency year in, year out, in the context of such hatreds that swirled around him. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah, and he also played a season or two in the Negro Leagues too, right? So he had ties. He was one of the last guys that had ties by the time he retired to the Negro Leagues.
Yeah, the Indianapolis Clowns, as they were called. And we're losing those players at a record pace, like players who can truly attest to what it meant to play in the Negro League. So that's another reason to mark his passing, certainly.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned Tom Brady, because I so often think about, especially these athletes that are lionized, the white athletes that are kind of, they become statues while they play, because of the fact that they don't have to face,
Yeah.
they don't have to face the same things that their black counterparts face. Colin Kaepernick being the obvious counterpart to that. Tom Brady or Drew Brees or these types of guys, the Peyton Mannings of the world, they can stay in a very kind of safe lane. They can choose a safe cause, whether it's cancer or whatever, something that is not in any way, divisive. Everybody, like nobody's like, fuck cancer except fuck the disease. So these guys can stay in a safe lane in terms of the causes that they pick, and they have a foundation, and they just further become that statue that I'm talking about. Whereas Colin Kaepernick or Cam Newton or any of these guys, they have to face so many other peripheral things. Again, tying back to Hank Aaron, I think those things get lost so often. The accomplishments of black athletes that they also have to kind of navigate this world that their white counterparts really have the option of opting into or completely
Yes.
staying out of.
I was asked the question on a different show. Can we now call Tom Brady the greatest American athlete to ever live? And what I said was, look, if you want to call him the greatest quarterback to ever play, you could certainly make that case. But I would make the case that you could never call a white athlete the greatest athlete to ever play, or white male athlete, to be clear, because the reason you just said, because they don't have the burden of representation that comes with playing. They can focus just on playing. Not that Tom Brady hasn't made his share of mistakes over the years, but when he messes up, it's Tom Brady's mistake, not white people's mistake. When black athletes messed up, it becomes this question of representation, like this burden of, well, what kind of music are you listening to? How are you wearing your clothes? Who is the posse that you are hanging out with? And it's this whole representation. And that's how it is in normal times. When there are periods of struggle, like we've seen the last couple of years in the Black Lives Matter movement, there is this expectation that you are going to have to say something. And if you don't say something, that's read as a statement that's as serious as saying something, and you get a different kind of criticism from a different sector. And
Do you mean specifically
like
black? Do you mean black athletes?
black athletes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of people like Jordan and Tiger Woods. And to go to Henry Aaron's time, people like Willie Mays. There have always been star black athletes who've made the decision, politics is just not for me. But in periods of heightened struggle, and Willie Mays dealt with this, and Tiger Woods has certainly dealt with this, you get criticism as well for not speaking out. And so a lot of those athletes, that they've made the case that, like, no one's asking like Phil Mickelson what he thinks about the federal death penalty. No one's asking Phil Mickelson about what he thinks about the fact of women not being allowed to play at certain golf courses. But that's something that Tiger, and believe me, I've written 1,000 columns criticizing Tiger Woods. I'm not giving him a pass on anything. It's just to say that to the Tiger Woodses of the world, deal with things that Tom Brady's never have to deal with. They can focus solely on the task of their play, which is why I don't think you can call Tom Brady the greatest athlete, because of the absence of obstacles he has to deal with in order to ply his trade.
Yeah, it's funny. I did a bit in one of my specials about how racism was kind of like the first steroids in a certain sense, that white guys in the early NBA were playing, these guys that should have been plumbers or whatever were playing, professional sports, so that the landscape was severely skewed. But all of these things do skew the landscape and the things that athletes are able to achieve, and the peripheral things that they have to deal with. I want to ask you about a contemporary of Aaron's, just as, because I think it's another good comparison. Somebody like Mickey Mantle, who was celebrated for his off the field exploits and drinking and carousing and all these things, like the complete opposite of the way a black athlete could conduct himself. But that kind of thing had to gall somebody like, I would imagine, somebody like Hank Aaron or black athletes in general, that here's this, this precious white boy being celebrated who shows up drunk half the time and, is a great player in his own right, but just the different set of circumstances.
And also because, the media not only protected Mickey Mantle, but they hung out with Mickey Mantle. They drank with Mickey Mantle. They caroused with Mickey Mantle. Let's all go to Toots Shores and have a night on the town. They never did that with Jackie Robinson. And Jackie Robinson was getting speeches from Branch Rickey about the utter importance of his representation when he's off the field, basically being told, if you want to see more black athletes in Major League Baseball, you better live, a very certain kind of buttoned up life. Or else the examples are going to be used against the players to come. And with that comes a certain amount of pressure too. And we've only, I mean, broken out of that in recent years. And you could argue in some cases we haven't broken out of that. Like, for example, there are always people looking to tear down athletes, like LeBron James is someone who comes to mind. And if LeBron James served to live a certain kind of life, that would be used not only against him, but against the idea of athletes using their politics for a greater purpose. I mean, you saw this when LeBron James was part of the NBA players who went on strike last August. One of the first things that happened was Jared Kushner being on CNN. This is Jared Kushner of all people, like somebody who was birthed in a cosseted privilege, the likes of which 99.9% of the world could not imagine. And here's Jared Kushner talking about LeBron being privileged enough to go on strike, and how, meat packers can't do that. It's like, dude, you're sending meat packers to their deaths, and now you're going to use them as a shield, as a way to criticize LeBron James. I mean, to me, that is racism right there, because you're saying that he doesn't have the right to politics. He should just shut up and play. And that's an old racist trope. And it's the sort of thing that the Mickey Mantles of the world never had to deal with.
And so much of I think the prism through which America consumes sports, and I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this being a sports writer. It's through the white lens. The as you say, the media, going back to Hank Aaron's days, were hanging out with the white athletes, drinking with them. They were friends. They would keep certain secrets. They would uphold certain, they would kind of, prop them up, their image and all of this. And black athletes didn't have the same access. And certainly you could argue non-English speaking athletes, as Latinx players came in, also had similar issues. But because to this day, it's largely a white lens through which sports runs, would you say that a lot of the white media still is complicit in not really putting on a journalistic hat? It's more like they're kind of serving the league, or they're serving ESPN, or they're serving, their own interests.
Progress is glacial in the world of sports writing, but that doesn't mean there hasn't been significant change to how sports is reported over the last, I would say, 15, 20 years. In the time that I've been a sports writer, there have been galactic changes, yet that dynamic you're talking about still remains. The changes that I'm referring to have to do first and foremost with social media, and with athletes being able to get their words, message, and ideas out to the public the way they want to say them, whether it's over IG, Twitter, Facebook, what have you. They can say, this is what I think, and not have their words distorted, not have to go through a filter. So that has necessitated a lot of change in the world of sports writing. The other big change of sports writing is that you've seen develop in the Trump era this, I'm not going to name names just because I don't believe in giving people like this free publicity, but this sector of sports writers who are openly crypto fascists. And they've decided to set up a pole of attraction as people who are racist, who do want athletes to shut up, who do think that sports is about, you entertain me and I'm going to, get hammered. And if you do anything to break that kind of, that sheltered space, that safe space, if you will, then you're an enemy and part of the problem. And you've also seen more sports writers who are political and who are willing to look at sports from different angles. And you've seen more academics who have always tried to look at sports through a more holistic lens, starting to break out and write more popular pieces. So there have been some nice changes over the last 20 years and some ugly changes over the last 20 years. But the fundamental issue that you describe, which is who's doing the reporting, what do they look like, how much diversity is there, how much diversity of thought is there, when you're talking about newspapers, sports radio, ESPN, there the progress is truly glacial.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And maybe just as a final thought, thinking about, Hank Aaron, as I think about, like, his contemporaries, black athletes, you kind of have, the one line sentence of Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. I think about other sports guys like Bill Russell, who was seen by the white media as prickly and radical, was seen largely as a winner first and foremost, but also a proud black man who was not shy about expressing his thoughts. Hank Aaron, I guess, was kind of in between in that, as you say, he did speak out at times over the years,
Mhm,
but there was more of a reserve to Hank Aaron.
mhm.
Uh, but how would you kind of, in the final analysis, talk about both? I mean, obviously, his impact as a player is singular. So that alone could be it. But he's a black man in America, so there's always more to say.
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, strong recommendation for people to read a book called The Last Hero about Henry Aaron by Howard Bryant. And it goes through how Henry Aaron, behind the scenes, supported people fighting Jim Crow, how he behind the scenes made his stands against segregation of ballparks when he was coming up, about how, till the end of his life, he was sitting on a board that dealt with making sure that people who were arrested got decent representation in court.
Hmm.
So the political mind of Henry Aaron was always central to who he was. And he happened to be soft spoken, as you said. He wasn't somebody to jump on the box and let folks know where he was coming from, but he was somebody who everybody knew was a political person. He had that reputation and that respect, and he never received the kind of withering glare that the black press gave Willie Mays, for example. For if you go back and look at articles, there was a lot of anger in the black press towards Willie Mays because he had so much fame, but openly defended his right not to speak, his own right
Mm.
to not speak out. And Henry Aaron was never subjected to that because people really didn't know where he stood.
Hmm. Well, Dave, I really appreciate you making the time. Like I said, I everything you put out, I always read, and
Thank you.
yeah, I appreciate the perspective that you bring, and thank you for speaking on Hank Aaron today.
Well, thank you for the example and the career that you've built, Ted. It means a lot to a lot of folks.
I appreciate that.